If you've got your Bibles with you, let's go ahead and open up together to Exodus chapter 10. We're continuing our walk through the book of Exodus, and we've been walking through the 10 signs, often called the 10 plagues, but these are 10 wonders, 10 supernatural signs that God performs in order to rescue and redeem Israel, in order to judge Egypt, and ultimately in order that his name and his fame, that the glory of God might be demonstrated to everyone, everywhere. This week we're in chapter 10, and we're going to be looking at signs 8 and 9. The first sign is the sign of Locust, and the second, the sign of darkness. But I've titled this sermon Darkness Squared, because they're really both about darkness. And so as we get into this battle between Yahweh and Pharaoh, the battle between the God of the Hebrews and all the gods of Egypt, specifically the God that Pharaoh considers himself to be, there's this escalation of this battle between God and Pharaoh. But in all honesty, it's not really much of a battle, is it? I mean, it's pretty one-sided. Pharaoh doesn't perform any signs or wonders in return. Pharaoh has no true power to go against God. God is the one that holds all the cards, so to speak. You know, I directed us several weeks back to Psalm chapter 2. Psalm 2 starts this way. It says, "Why do the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against Yahweh the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us burst their bonds apart and cast away their cords from us." So the psalmist says, look around at this world, and we see king after king and kingdom after kingdom, people after people, nation after nation, trying to go their own way, trying to do their own thing, trying to rule and lead and guide themselves. And in order to do that, they have to throw off the yoke of God. They've got to burst apart God's obligations upon all of humanity. And what is God's response to this human desire for freedom from God? Well, the psalmist says, "He who sits in the heavens laughs. The Lord holds them in derision." God's response to human pride and human hubris. God's response to mankind's attempt to do life without him, to supplant him, to replace him, to be him. God laughs. It's hard to find the language and the metaphor to understand the true distance between God and us. You know, but I was thinking about when my son was just small. I mean, just barely past toddler, but so aggressive, because you know that's how God makes little boys. And man, he wanted to wrestle me like non-stop. It was like just and he liked to sneak attack me. You know, he'd blitz me. I'd be walking in, I didn't know he was there, and he'd just come running and he'd attack me. And like he was so intense and like so convinced that he could take me out. You know what I mean? Like you could just see it on his face. Like just he'd grab me and I'd try so hard not to laugh because I didn't want to hurt his feelings. Like, "You're doing good, buddy. You're almost there." Well, now I don't want anything to do with that. But like at that moment, he'd come at me with everything that he had, and it was adorable. Right? And I think that's what this text is exclaiming. Like Pharaoh or whoever it is, whatever nation, whatever king, they're coming after God with everything they got, and they're like, "I got you, God." And he's like, "Oh, that's so cute." Like, nice try. Keep at it. Right? Like, there's something about, like, God is way beyond us. Like, he's way bigger and better and stronger and smarter than you'll ever hope to be, than anyone will ever hope to be. It's a lesson that Pharaoh just refuses to learn. We see that right in the beginning of our text this morning. Starting in verse 1 of chapter 10, then Yahweh said to Moses, "Go in to Pharaoh. I've heavied his heart. I've hardened his heart and the heart of his servants, that I may show these signs of mine among them." Now, God's not doing something to them that they didn't want to do. God's not unfairly or unjustly doing something to the heart of Pharaoh and now the heart of the Egyptians as a whole that they haven't earnestly wanted and desired. They've chosen their path. God, the verb here for hardened could just as easily and probably better be translated as strengthened. God's giving them what they ask for. They want to rebel against him. They want to fight against him. They want to go their own way. And so God strengthens them to do what it is that they want to do. But God has a purpose in that his signs might be revealed among them. And it says, and you may tell, he's specifically talking to Moses here, you may tell in the hearing of your son and of your grandson how I have dealt harshly with the Egyptians and what signs I have done among them. So God says, I'm doing this so that this story will be told generationally. You're going to tell it, Moses, to your son and your grandson, and it's going to be passed on how I have dealt. And this word in the ESV, translated as harshly, I think is much better translated as humiliated. God says, I want you to tell how I went up against Pharaoh, and Pharaoh couldn't do anything about it. I humiliated him over and over and over again. And he says that you, Moses, may know that I am Yahweh. I am the covenant-keeping God. I am the God of gods. I am the one that is sovereign over all. There is no one like me. I find it interesting as we continue to walk through the book of Exodus that this is exactly actually what happens. We see it most immediately in Exodus 18. So now, and we'll get there in, a couple years or whatever. But after Moses and God leads the people out of Egypt and across the Sea of Reeds and brings them out, he's reunited with his father-in-law, Jethro. And in Exodus chapter 18, he recounts to Jethro, his father-in-law, everything that God did. And Jethro's response in Exodus 18:11 is this. He says, now I know that Yahweh is greater than all gods. Yahweh is greater than all Elohim, because in this affair they dealt arrogantly with the people. This is what God is doing. We see it begin to unpack and play out immediately. They come out and they describe it and they tell of it, and the point is that no one can stand against God. No one can stand against him. So Moses and Aaron went into Pharaoh and said to him, thus says Yahweh, the God of the Hebrews. How long? How long will you refuse to humble yourself before me? This is a very pointed question. I mean, God has sent Moses and Aaron in before Pharaoh multiple times now, calling him, let my people go. Set my people free. Send my people out. And time after time after time, Pharaoh has hardened his heart. He's refused. He's rejected God's authority. He's rejected God's command. And now God, speaking through Moses, says, how long will you refuse to humble yourself before me? Let my people go, send them out, that they may serve me. This is the issue. Pharaoh wants them to serve him. God wants them to serve him. So this is poetic justice. How long until you humble yourself? If you remember back in Exodus 1:11, when Pharaoh began to enact this evil genocide and attack upon the Israelites, Pharaoh, and it's the previous Pharaoh, but he set taskmasters over them to afflict them. That word afflict is the same verb here that we in 10 of humble. He set these taskmasters over to humble them. So the attack of Pharaoh and the Egyptians was an attack upon the people of Israel and their God, and their intent was to humble them, to break them, to beat them down. And so what we see now is God comes in, and God, this is all poetic justice. God is giving to the Egyptians what they gave to the Hebrews. You tried to humble them. God says, I'm going to humble you. He says, but if you refuse to let my people go, if you refuse to send them out, behold, tomorrow I will bring locusts into your country. And you're like, I'm not scared of some bugs. You should be. Okay, this is a big one. This is a big deal. I'm going to send locusts into your country, and they shall cover the face of the land. They shall cover the face of the land. Literally in the Hebrew, it says they will cover the eye of the land. Hold on to that phrase. We're going to come back to it later. So that no one will see the land. There's going to be so many locusts. Everywhere you look, that's all you're going to be able to see. They will cover the eye of the land, and no one will see the land. And they shall eat whatever is left to you after the hail, and they shall eat every tree of yours that grows in the field, and they shall fill your houses and the houses of all your servants and of all the Egyptians, as neither your fathers or your grandfathers have seen from the day they came on the earth to this day. Moses is throwing down. Like it's ramping up. And one of the things that I find fascinating is we watch this progression is the development and the growth of Moses. Moses speaks this clearly, articulately, courageously in front of Pharaoh. He calls him out. And then the verse ends this way. Then he turned and went out from Pharaoh. And the verb there for then he turned, it literally means he turned his back, or he turned on his heels and walked away. So like, think about this. Moses walks into the court of Pharaoh. He's there, his headdress, the serpent. He's got all his courtiers. He's got his guards. He's got his palace. In come Moses and Aaron. They're just simple shepherds. They got staves. Nothing fancy about them. And Moses, he walks in. He's like, here's the deal. Send them out, or the bugs are coming. And then he's like, peace out, and he walks. Like and you don't do that. You don't turn your back on Pharaoh. You don't do that, but he does. So the power balance is shifting. And you think about Moses when he started, he's like terrified. He didn't want to go. He's begging God not to send him. I need Aaron. I need this. I can't speak. And yet, as he steps and grows into his calling, we see him transform into this courageous leader that stands before the most powerful man on the planet at the time, calls him out, and turns his back and walks away. Amazing. And then it gets interesting. It says, then Pharaoh's servants said to him, how long? So we get two how longs, right? How long will you take to humble yourself, Pharaoh? Now, Pharaoh's servants turned to him and basically asked the same question. How long are you going to do this, Pharaoh? How long shall this man be a snare to us? It's interesting. They won't name Moses. Like they don't want, there's disdain and scorn here. How long are you going to let this man? It's not this man. It's Yahweh doing this. But they turn to Pharaoh and they're like, dude, call it quits. We're losing. How long are you going to let this go on? They say, let the men go that they may serve the Lord their God. Do you not understand that Egypt is ruined? It's already ruined. But see, there's something about sin, and there's something about the sin of pride especially that blinds us to reality. It blinds us to reality. I'm not just talking about the rich and powerful. I'm talking about everybody. Like when we try to go our own way, when we try to supplant God, when we try to be our own God or we follow after God's, we become blinded to reality. We become our own worst enemies. And that's what's happening to Pharaoh. Like his country is being devastated. He's being humiliated. And he still refuses to acknowledge it. His closest counselors are like, come on, tap out. And they make this suggestion. They say, let the men go. And it's very specifically the masculine plural of men. So they're giving him an idea here. Let the men go. Let the men go out. We'll keep the women and children here because that way the men are going to have to come back. Let the men go. And so it says Moses and Aaron were brought back to Pharaoh. The Hebrew there for brought back means forcibly brought back. Right? So I don't think Pharaoh was super excited that Moses turned his back and walked out on him. So he sends his guards and they drag Moses and Aaron back in front of him. And he says to them, all right, go. All right, go. As if he's the one that's in control. Go. Serve Yahweh your God. But which ones are to go? It's an interesting Hebrew phrase. It literally means, who and who shall go? Who and who shall go? And Moses said, we're all going. We will go out with our young and our old. We will go with our sons and our daughters, with our flocks and our herds, for we must hold a feast. And the word there for feast is a celebration, an act of worship. We must worship Yahweh. Pharaoh's like, who and who shall go? And Moses is like, oh, that's easy. We're all going. We're taking everyone and we're taking everything that we've got. And Pharaoh said to them, and this is, man, sarcasm is so difficult to translate into text, isn't it? Like a lot of you have trouble getting sarcasm when it's like right in your face, right? Let's be honest. Like and it's really difficult to put into writing, and it's real difficult to put into writing of an ancient language and then translate it into English. But this is one of the most sarcastic sentences in all of the Scripture. Pharaoh's like, oh, the Lord will be with you if I ever let you and your little ones go. He's like, Moses says, we're going to take everyone. He's like, oh, yeah, right. If that ever happens, well, that will surely be a sign that Yahweh is actually with you. And you're like, Pharaoh, like, dude, have you, like, Yahweh's with them over and over and over. You keep getting beat. And he's like, oh, yeah, we'll see about that. And then he says, look, you have some evil purpose in mind. You've got this evil purpose in front of your face. I think there's an interesting little play on words happening here in the Hebrew, because the word that the author uses for evil here is the Hebrew word ra'ah, which is the Hebraized word for Ra, which is the sun god, the most powerful god in the Egyptian pantheon. And by the way, as I've mentioned before, Pharaoh is believed to be the incarnation of Ra, the sun god. So there's this interesting play on words, like the author of this is going, putting this in Pharaoh's mouth, like he's being sarcastic, but he has no clue what he's actually saying. You've got evil purpose in mind. He says, but no, go. The men among you shall go and serve Yahweh, for that is what you are asking. And they were driven out from Pharaoh's presence. Literally in the Hebrew it says, and he drove them out. Pharaoh drove them out. So like, he really was not impressed with Moses turning around and walking out on him. So it's like, this is what's going to happen. You're going to take the men. You're going to be happy that I'm giving you the men. Now get out of here. And he starts driving them out. And he has no idea that in his act of anger, in driving them out, all he's doing is beginning to fulfill the prophecy of God. Because if you remember back in Exodus 6:1, God said this, the Lord said to Moses, you shall see what I will do to Pharaoh. For with a strong hand, he, Pharaoh, will send them out. With a strong hand, he will drive them out of his land. The same verb, same word there for drive is what we get now in chapter 10. It's already beginning to happen. He's starting by driving Moses and Aaron out. But we keep reading. He's going to drive the people out when God is done with him. Pharaoh, man, in his pride, in his hubris, in his anger, in his foolishness, everything that he tries to do against God, God turns it and uses it against him. Because that's what God does. So then Yahweh said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the land of Egypt for the locusts, so that they may come upon the land of Egypt and eat every plant in the land, all that the hail has left. So Moses stretched out his staff over the land of Egypt, and Yahweh brought an east wind upon the land all that day and all that night. When it was morning, the east wind had brought the locusts, and the locusts came up over all the land of Egypt and settled on the whole country of Egypt, and a dense swarm of locusts as had never been seen before nor ever will be again. There's so much imagery and judgment language. The east wind in the scriptures is always an act of judgment. That dense swarm of locusts, it literally reads a heavy swarm of locusts. Like over and over again through this narrative, there's this constant play on this word of heaviness, that God's glory is the true, heavy, weighty, worthy thing. And yet Pharaoh and the Egyptians keep thinking that they have the weight, they have the substance. And so they keep heavying their own hearts and rejecting God. And so God keeps bringing heaviness upon them over and over and over again. And like locusts are no joke. Like locusts are still an issue in our world today. The largest locust plague on record today took place in 1950 to 1962. That's 12 years in East Africa. There were approximately 50 different swarms in that time period. They covered an approximate 1,000 square kilometers and rose 1,000 to 1,500 meters into the air. Okay. The largest swarm, individual swarm, the largest one, covered 200 square kilometers, and it had approximately 10 billion locusts in it. And what the text tells us is that the locust swarm that came upon Egypt was the largest that has ever or will ever be. So it was bigger than that. It was bigger than that. And it says they covered the face of the whole land. I told you before, it's literally in the Hebrew, they covered the eye of the land. The eye of the land in Egyptian is a significant statement. The eye of the land to the Egyptians was the sun. Egypt considered itself the kingdom of light, the kingdom of the sun. Ra was their sun god, the chief deity above all. Their whole understanding of who they were and their power and their glory was tied up in the glory of the sun and the light of their kingdom and the power of the sun to give life. And so what we see in this text, now there were minor deities of like Locust god, and clearly God's demonstrating power over that. But these last two plagues, God's demonstrating his power over their chief god, Ra, Adam Ra, sometimes called. And so these locusts come, and what do they cover? They cover the face of the land, which is the sun. In other words, it gets dark. All you can see are locusts everywhere. And they eat. They eat. Like each individual locust doesn't weigh that much, but they can eat more than their body weight, which is a skill that I wish I possessed sometimes, but it's probably good that I don't, right? But they ate all the plants of the land and all the fruit of the trees that the hail had left. Not a green thing remained, neither tree nor plant of the field throughout all the land of Egypt. I've mentioned that a big part of what's happening in these signs or plagues narrative is that it's an act of decreation. It's a reversal of what we see in Genesis 1. And that's exactly what is going on here. And so then Pharaoh hastily called Moses and Aaron and said, I have sinned against Yahweh your God and against you. He singles out Moses. It's singular. I've sinned against Yahweh and I've sinned against you, which is really an amazing statement. It's the second time that he said that I've sinned, and that's an amazing statement in the Egyptian context, but the ancient Egyptians believed that Pharaoh was divine and sinless in his lifetime. I talked about the Egyptian belief that after you died, you were placed on a scale against the feather of truth and righteousness. The Egyptians believed that because Pharaoh was so perfect and divine and sinless, he didn't have to face judgment. That whenever Pharaoh died, he was simply transformed into the god Osiris. And you're like, well, I thought he was the god Ra. Yeah, he was. Well, then how does he become the god Osiris? Like, the Egyptians had their own way of thinking about things, okay? But this is how they thought. So for Pharaoh, who's considered sinless and perfect and righteous, to stand and say, I have sinned against Yahweh and against you, is a monumental statement. And once again, we're like, has he finally learned his lesson? Tragically, no. He says, now, therefore, forgive my sin. He demands it. Right? He's trying to command it. He's still trying to control it. He says, forgive my sin, please, only this once. Like, do you not remember last week or last month? Do you not remember what's been going on? Really? You think you've only sinned one time? Just this once, and plead with Yahweh your God to remove this death from me. So he went out from Pharaoh and pleaded with the Lord. And the Lord turned the wind into a very strong west wind. Literally in the Hebrew it says he turned the very strong wind of the sea. He turned the wind to go out to the sea, and it lifted the locusts and drove them into the sea of reeds, and not a single locust was left in all the country of Egypt. There's some pretty happy fish in the sea that day. Just gone. Just gone. Like there's always at least two miracles in each one of these signs. So a miracle that they show up when God demands, and a miracle that they go. And there's so much like prefiguring taking place here. As we're going to get to the deliverance of the Hebrews out of the land, how does God part the Sea of Reeds? With a strong east wind. And as they come through, the Israelites, every single one of them is safe. And when the Egyptians come in, every single one of them is destroyed in the waters. There's so much symbolism and prophetic imagery and prefiguring taking place here. It's like God God's demonstrating over and over again that he is in control. But Yahweh hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not send the people of Israel out. He would not let the people go. So we get to the 9th sign. The Lord, Yahweh, said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand to the heavens, that there may be darkness over the land of Egypt, a darkness to be felt." It's a really interesting phrase in the Hebrew. It's like it's a deep darkness, like I was thinking about this, and my mind flashed back. I've only been on one cruise, and we were in the cruise, and we were in the cheap cabin, the interior cheap cabins with no windows. And I remember that first night we get into bed, and you flick off the light, and it's the darkest dark I've ever experienced. At first, it was terrifying, and then I'm like, I'm going to get the best sleep I've ever had in my life. I got the hum of the engines, the slight I didn't want it. Anyway. An absolute absence of light. It's a darkness that is so dark, it's heavy. You think about that. Egypt, the land of light. Pharaoh, the incarnation of Atum Ra, the god of light. There's a darkness upon the land, a darkness to be felt. So Moses stretched out his hand towards the heavens, and there was pitch darkness in all the land of Egypt for 3 days. And in that decreation motive, right? Like that idea of deep darkness, that same word is used in Genesis 1:2 of darkness was over the waters of the land. Like God is taking Egypt back to this pre-creation state and demonstrating that he and he alone is the creator, and he alone is the one that gives light, and he alone is the one that gives and controls life. So for 3 days, it is just pitch darkness, heavy darkness. It literally in the Hebrew says, and there was a darkness. 2 different words for darkness used. It's dark. And they did not see one another, nor did anyone rise from his place for 3 days. But all the people of Israel had light where they lived. I try to wrap my brain about that and think about what was that like. Like that here they are, they're in such just terrible. They can't go anywhere. They can't do anything. They cannot function. But the Israelites in the land of Goshen, where they are, they had light. So the symbolism is so in your face. It's so in your face that it's almost easy to miss at that point. Right? What is God saying in this sign? Saying, there's a kingdom of light and there's a kingdom of darkness. Egypt, Pharaoh, you think you're the kingdom of light, but you're actually the kingdom of darkness. And my kingdom, God says, is actually the kingdom of light. So for 3 days, you're not going to see nothing. You're not going to do anything. You are going to dwell in your darkness while my people dwell in the light. I love how Carpenter says in his commentary, he says, the Egyptians become immobilized, so to speak, in the tomb of Egypt. Egypt, the land of light, has become the land of darkness. And Pharaoh called Moses and said, "Go, serve Yahweh. Your little ones also may go with you." You think about it. You remember his sarcastic comment? Oh, yeah, Yahweh will have to be with you if I ever let your little ones go with you. Now, after 3 days of absolute darkness, 3 days. Imagine what's going through the minds of the Egyptians. Okay, they believe that, see, Ra, the sun god, every day would rise in the east and bring light and life to the kingdom of light. And then at nighttime, he would descend and he would go into the underworld and he would fight. Every night he would fight Apophis, the great serpent dragon god of the Egyptian pantheon. And he had other gods helping him out. And so every day, every night it descends and he goes into the underworld. And every morning he resurrects to newness of life. This is their theology. This is their understanding of life. And so now, for 3 days, Ra, the greatest God that they know, the God of the sun, doesn't resurrect. He's gone. He's in the land of the dead. And Pharaoh, who's supposed to be Ra, everybody's looking to Pharaoh, make it right, make it better, give us light. And Pharaoh's done. So he says, go serve the Lord, just you take your little ones. Everybody can go. Only I'm going to detain your flocks and your herds. I'm going to detain it. It's translated, your herds and flocks must remain, but it's a stronger verb. I'm going to hold back your flocks and your herds, which would be a death sentence. Think about that. The entire population of the Israelites is going to go out into the wilderness without any food source, let alone without anything to worship and sacrifice to Yahweh. They're going to go out into the wilderness without anything. It's a death sentence, which is exactly what Pharaoh wants. And Moses said, and this is where the Hebrew is really, really beautiful. He says, you, he says it twice. Indeed, you will give us sacrifices. And it's a command. It's a command. After 3 days of darkness, where God has humiliated Pharaoh and the nation, Moses stands before him and says, you will give us what we need. Pharaoh's like, you can't take your herds. He's like, no, you're going to give them to us. We're not only going to take ours, but anything that you got left, we're going to take those too. And you're going to give them to us. That we have sacrifices and burnt offerings, that we may sacrifice to Yahweh our God. Our livestock also must go with us. Not a hoof shall be left behind. Not a hoof. For we must take them to serve Yahweh our God. And we don't know with what we must serve Yahweh until we arrive there. I mean, which is a true statement. Like, God has called them to come out and worship him, but he hasn't told them what that worship's going to look like yet. So they don't know. But Yahweh hardened Pharaoh's heart, and even after all of this, he would not let them go. He would not let them go. So I say again this week, as I have the last several weeks, the primary lesson out of this is don't be like Pharaoh. What else? It says, then Pharaoh said to him, get away from me. Get out of my sight. Take care never to see my face again, for on the day you see my face, you shall die. Pharaoh's throwing a temper tantrum, right? And the irony, do you not see the irony, pun intended? It's a plague of darkness. They can't see each other. Nobody can see their brother's face. And Pharaoh has the audacity to say to Moses, get out of my sight. And if I ever see your face again, you'll die. And Moses is like, okay, as you say, I will not see your face again. Oh, the irony. So this chapter, these two plagues, and they're really both plagues of darkness. They play on this primal biblical narrative of light and dark. Darkness as a sign of chaos and death. Light as a symbol of order and life. It's like, It's not a mistake that the scripture begins that in the beginning there was Yahweh. And he says, let there be light. Let there be life. And so here we are now in this battle between Yahweh and Pharaoh, Yahweh and the Elohim of Egypt, and God is the one that controls life. God is the God of light. So this text so vividly and powerfully portrays for us the reality that there is a kingdom of light and there is a kingdom of darkness. There is a kingdom of light and there is a kingdom of darkness. Or maybe better yet, I should say it this way. There is one kingdom of light, Yahweh's, and any other kingdom is a kingdom of darkness. So there is one kingdom of light, and there are multitudes of kingdoms of darkness. Any kingdom that is not Yahweh's is a kingdom of darkness. And so this text, at least to me, and I hope for you as well, calls us to face this reality that there is a kingdom of light and life that belongs to Yahweh alone. And every other kingdom is nothing but a pale imitation and a weak pretense. And even if they pretend to offer light, even if they claim to be a kingdom of light, are actually a kingdom of darkness. And so it calls us to make a choice, doesn't it? Like you got to wrestle with this. What kingdom do I belong to? What king and kingdom has my allegiance, has my affection, has my hope, has my trust? And for you and I today, if your hope is in the kingdom of the United States, if your first and primary allegiance is to the president or the Constitution or democracy or capitalism, you are, hear me, and I love you is why I'm saying it, if you put your hope and your allegiance there, you belong to a kingdom of darkness. Is it better than the other kingdoms? Yeah, it might be. But it's still a kingdom of darkness. It's not our hope. It doesn't get our heart. We don't give our allegiance to anyone other than Yahweh, the God of light. And we got to own this. We got to hold it. So Proverbs 4:18-19 says this: the path of the righteous is like the light of dawn, which shines brighter and brighter until full day. But the way of the wicked is like deep darkness. They do not know over what they stumble. This imagery of light and darkness, it's everywhere in the scriptures. One of my favorite passages, it's all throughout the book of Isaiah. One of my favorites is in Isaiah 50. It says this. It says, who among you fears Yahweh and obeys the voice of his servant? It just flat out asks it. Like, who here fears Yahweh? Who here has a reverence and a loyalty and a love and a faith and an affection towards Yahweh? Who is on team Yahweh and obeys the voice of his servant? Let him who walks in darkness and has no light trust in the name of Yahweh and rely on his God. Let him who walks in darkness. So if you live in a broken world, if you don't look around and watch the news and take a look at our world and not see that it's dark, ironically, you're as blind as you can be. So here's the prophet saying, if you are in darkness, trust in God. He's the light. He's the life. But there is a choice. There is a choice. And it continues, it says, but behold, all you who kindle a fire, who equip yourselves with burning torches. So you can choose to rely on the light of the Lord in the land of darkness, or you can try to make your own fire. You can try to take God's place. You can try to make your own light. And God says through the prophet, like, if you want to do that, you are free to do that. But he closes, he says, walk by the light of your own fire. Walk by the torches that you have kindled. This is what you will get from my hand. You will lie down in torment. See, there's a way that seems right to a man, but in the end it leads to death. We live in a world that is constantly rejecting the light of God and trying to kindle and strike our own flame, our own fire, give ourselves the warmth and life that only God can give. And God says, like, go for it. But you'll get exactly what you deserve. That's the story of Pharaoh. It's what we're supposed to learn from this narrative, that like you can reach the pinnacle of human kingdoms. You can have more power and more glory and more strength than anyone else in the world, like Pharaoh. And all you will do in the light of your own torch is lay down in torment. Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, he says, talking about people in the world, he says, in their case, the God of this world has blinded the minds of unbelievers. And we have an enemy, and that the enemy's design is to blind us, to keep us in darkness, like to keep us in that darkness, and to keep them from seeing the light of the gospel of the glory of the King, who is the true imago Dei, image of God. Satan and the enemy does everything that it can to keep us from seeing the light of Jesus. We proclaim is not ourselves, but we proclaim Jesus. We proclaim Jesus, the Messiah, the King, as Lord, and ourselves as servants for Jesus' sake, for God who said, let light shine out of darkness. God who created in the beginning, God who said, let light shine out of darkness, has shone in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus the King. So this is what I want to say. This is what I need to say to you this morning. There is only one light that gives life, and it has been perfectly manifested in Jesus the King. And He is the one that has shone in the darkness, and He is the one that leads us out of darkness into the light and life of God. God has shone into our hearts with the light of Jesus the King. And then he says, and I'll close with this, and we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that the surpassing power belongs to God and not to us. And the imagery here is profound. There's always a temptation to say, well, we know Jesus. We know Jesus the King. We've got the light of the King, and we're not living in darkness anymore. We're living in the light, so we've got it all figured out, and our lives are going to be awesome and amazing and comfortable and convenient. We're going to have everything that we want, and the reality is, it's so not that. And the imagery is we have this treasure in jars of clay, and jars of clay they're not strong jars. And they crack. And some of you are more cracked than others, but here's the good news. Here's the good news. When we crack, what is revealed? The light that is within us. So that nobody might look at us and say, man, I want to be like them. And they'll look at us and say, I want what's inside of them. Because that light is life. So I stand before you this morning. And I call you to choose. Will you choose the kingdom of light or remain in the kingdom of darkness? The good news of the gospel is that God sent Jesus that we might be transferred from the domain of darkness, the kingdom of darkness, to the kingdom of the beloved Son. Jesus came to bring us light, and that light is the life of God. Choose today, choose now, and forevermore. For as long as God gives you life and breath, choose the light of Jesus. Amen.